Good morning friends, you are most welcome to Think Eyes channel. Today we are going to discuss practicing anthropology, in which we are going to discuss introduction to practicing anthropology, and we are discussing unit 3, challenges and dilemmas of ethics in practicing anthropology. And our topic is ethical concerns in anthropology's history. With the growth of new ideas and notions, anthropology has flourished immensely. Fields of investigations are increasing with great rapidity. Along with it, the growth of applied actions has given birth to fresh challenges and confrontations. In turn, this builds new concerns related to ethics. To delve into history, we find that deliberation on ethical code always occurred with it becoming a major issue of concern during the Vietnam War. The anxiety was aggravated by research projects which were highly ill devised and were conducted without any moral ethos. These were embarrassing disclosures that anthropologists had cooperated in government counterinsurgency research in Latin America in the early 1960s and in Southeast Asia in the late 1960s. Fluher Loban, 1991. In fact, much before the Vietnam War, on the debacles of the 1960s, in 1919, questions were raised by French Boas in a letter to the nation, where he openly alleged four anthropologists working as spies under the facade of their job as researchers. In Boas' own words, he stated that a person who used science as a cover for political spying, who demeans himself to pose before a foreign government as an investigator and asks for assistance in his alleged researches in order to carry on under this cloak his political mechanization, prostitutes science in an unpardonable way and forfeits the right to be classed as a scientist. Boas, 1919, in Weaver, 1973. This incident cited by Boas is still a matter of debate among many anthropologists, and the gravity of the act still finds mention in published papers, pledges taken at public meetings, and the ethics code brought out by the American Anthropological Association and the Society for Applied Anthropology. The main concern among many other, which is always discussed in ethical deliberation, is the possible injury or damage that the action of an anthropologist may do to a group of people or to an individual. An anthropologist practicing or community academic has to be sensitive to this concern, as he or she gets intimately connected to the community he or she works with. It becomes inevitable that the relationship between the investigator and the studied community or persons become complex. In such a situation, the results of the research has to be carefully put forward, or else there may be a critical unforeseen consequences. This can be explained in a clearer manner with the following example. Cora Du Bois, an anthropologist and advocate of the culture and personality school of thought, had done research in Indonesia in a place called Alor. This work was published as the People of Alor. Alor was conquered by the Japanese at the time of World War II. Once the war was over, Du Bois learned from sources that due to an action of a few Aloris resulting from their acquaintances with Du Bois led to the untoward execution of them, publicly beheaded by the Japanese during the war. The story goes that unwittingly these allies had mentioned that the Americans should achieve success in the war, as they thought the Americans were good people. The Alloys, prior to knowing Du Bois, had no knowledge about America or its inhabitants. Du Bois writes with the trepidation that there is no end to the intricate chain of responsibility and guilt that the pursuit of even the most acrid social research involves. Du Bois 1944, in Weaver 1973. This incident may sound unreal in terms of simple conducting of research having such a horrific consequences. Nevertheless, its reality highlights the fact that scientific efforts have the ability to produce astonishing damage. In this part of the lesson, we try to look into more such incidences from the history of anthropology in connection with the research ethics. Unethical conduct by anthropologists in the past has been apparently, but the most infamous and debated cases happened during the Vietnam War time. Here we will discuss the notorious Project Camelot introduced in Latin America and some monetarily aided research work conducted in North Thailand during the Vietnam War. Before the Vietnam issue occurred, the research project which faced much ridicule was Project Camelot. It was started in 1964 under the management of the Special Operation Research Office SORO of the US Army. This initiative was created to fund research in order to bring a stop to proliferation of communism in South America. This was to be done by the use of social research method to contradict insurgency research. The scheme at a large level was to include in its gamut of study Asia, Africa and Europe besides Latin America. In this dubious venture, anthropologists too were taken in to conduct research. However, as luck would have it, the dealings of the undertaking was made known to the Latin American press stylely even before the project gained any momentum. The project and its model faced powerful local response and the project was aborted. However, the inclusion of anthropologists in it left scars within the discipline's ideologies. Anthropologists, after this debacle of questioned virtues, tried to reaffirm their academic positions of scholars refuting vices like wars. There were protestations by the locals and the academics as the project was considered to have a fundamentalist bias and research was said to have powerful political insinuations. In the presence of the overtly subjugated classes in these areas, many people did not find the use of social sciences in the sustained social tranquility as approving. To explain simply, the involvement of social scientists to conduct research, which obviously meant encroaching on the undertakings of other countries, was not acceptable. Von Willisen, 2002. But sadly, in the late 1960s, a post for an anthropologist to conduct intelligence work in South Vietnam was advertised in a journal, American Anthropologist, of the American Anthropological Association, AAA. The proposal was highly criticized by the anthropology fraternity with a strict warning to the AAA and American Anthropological Association not to entertain such promotions in the future. In the 1970s, there were instances again of anthropologists assisting government on war-related research in the southeast of Asia, particularly in Thailand. In these circumstances, an important study took place which tried to look into the Tricky Issues of Ethics. It was done by Ralph L. Beals and was called Politics of Social Research 1969. This work and deliberations between the major members of the AAA American Anthropological Association brought out a committee on ethics which drafted the first AAA, that is American Anthropological Association Professional Code of Ethics in 1971, Fluher, Laban 1991, Willigen 2002. Another project which had acute repercussion in the anthropological community was the Thailand project. Without understanding the cultural makeup of the inhabitants in Thailand's hill tribes and their relationship with the elite lowlanders, some anthropologists went ahead with their studies funded by government supported agencies to offer their services to create social changes. To give a brief, the highland tribes lived in semi-isolation with their only means of contact with the rest of the Thailand and the world being their production and selling of opium, that is bhang. Due to their trade, Thailand government was coerced by international nations to stop the increasing opium transactions. Moreover, these tribes were looked down upon by the plain people of Thailand who deprecated them and their lifestyles. Needless to say, the tribes hardly had any political or economic influence and were not in good terms with the government. Balshaw 1976. This reason came in the spotlight when the Vietnam War got bigger. In the 1960s, social investigators from the Western world proliferated in number in the name of research. The investigators, including anthropologists, did not take into consideration the existing facts into account and only concentrated on the good amount of money that was pouring in for such investigations. They completely ignored the Valley's Culture Jones 1971. The Advanced Research Projects Agency ARPA was one such funding agency of the American government from the Department of Defense which provided monetary support to this scheme. Their main interest was to conduct research directed towards the counterinsurgency intentions. This entire process of conducting research was done without any regard towards the country's cultural setup and ethical responsibilities. This led to the ridicule of these researchers in 1970 by the Student Mobilization Committee to End the War in Vietnam, who termed this as counterinsurgency research (IBID). This example of ethical violation worked as a lesson for anthropologists, subsequently generated awareness in ethical concerns. In a way, it was through the discord experienced during the Vietnam episode indirectly facilitated the understanding of our moral obligations. The process of discussing and finally accepting the respect ethical consideration was a painful and difficult one. However, the attempt by the AAA American Anthropological Association to make changes in 1971, which were finally out in 1981 with renewed codes of conduct for anthropological investigators, was commendable, though it too had its flaws. Next heading is disputes in ethical uses. When we deal with ethics and ethical concerns, there are some areas which clearly stand out and cannot be ignored. It is these concerns that we will discuss in the following paragraphs. First is the dispute of confidentiality. In anthropological research, the investigator may, in many societies, have to live and work among people and societies whom they are not familiar with, even if there is familiarity of some sort between the researchers and the researched. There may be norms which the researcher would have to abide by. One cannot forget the fact that it is the investigator who is the taker and thus placed in a supposedly subordinate position. It is of utmost importance that great care must be taken as to how one must behave among a society studied and represent them later in their writings in a way that their lives are not compromised with in any way. Rapport building and creating a relationship of utmost trust is the base of a healthy relationship between both so as to be beneficial to the researcher and not harmful to the researched. The trust created in the minds of respondents allows them to divulge a lot about their own society. However, it is the researchers' responsibility to protect their identities and retain confidentiality if sought for. Rapport and friendship build may lead to the revealing of information which might be helpful to the researcher but may turn to be damaging for the respondent and her or his community. It is the task of the researcher to comprehend such information and either not use it or, if it is of vital need for one's investigation, use them in such a way by not giving away the identity of the information giver. Mostly the informants give away information that might be damaging to them without realizing it due to their feeling of hospitality towards the researcher or also because they might be in awe of the power that the anthropologist might hold. They also reveal things unwittingly due to the need to flaunt their knowledge or because they seek recognition. It should be borne it should be borne borne in mind that though we try to provide the respondents enough privacy and secrecy, yet the use of important and at the same time harmful information may not be completely possible. In most cases, the assurance of anonymity promise becomes difficult. Mostly the legal rights to any information collected by the researcher belong to the funding agency funding a project. Thus, even when the researcher might want not to use any information or reveal a community's or a person's name, he or she might not be in a position to do so. Thus, it is to be noted that such situations must be treated cautiously. Though research findings are of immense help in myriad ways, they should not be utilized at the cost of the respondents' lives. Researchers should try their best to respect and protect the confidentiality of our respondents. However difficult, they may try to take care in their own small ways whenever and wherever possible. If not invited, one must not infringe upon the subject's personal space. Wherever possible, they should do away with the collection of the sensitive information. If collected, proper ways of keeping them should be devised during and after fieldwork. Sometimes, if names are to be used, pseudonyms can be used during the time of writing or documenting data. The researcher should always be truthful to the respondents and should let them be aware of all pros and cons, like the revealing of identities of familiar or groups or administrative officials unintentionally. They should from the beginning let the respondents be aware of any legal obligations and proceed accordingly. Lastly, it is always best to learn from the earlier experiences and mishaps of other researchers and the methods they use to cope with the issues of confidentiality. Next heading is the dispute of consent. The issue of confidentiality in is in sync with the issue of consent. This is a major concern in the arguments of ethics. Before resorting to anonymity of respondents when needed, the bigger task at hand for the anthropological researcher is to seek permission to probe into their lives and culture. It is highly important that the researcher, while taking consent, also makes the prospects respondents aware of the fact that they will be getting involved in. The respondent should be aware of the necessity of the research work, the knowledge of the research funders, their objectives, the ultimate use of the finding, and the effect that only these might have on them. Only when they are aware of these and give their consent to the researcher to proceed can the investigation be called ethically sound. The respondent should always be told that his or her participation is voluntary. This is termed informed consent. This is termed informed consent. In informed consent lies the basis of ethical inquiry. This term and use of it has been borrowed from research in medical arenas as it mostly uses human subjects to investigate. Cases of human abuse during experiments have also been heard from the medical world. All these connected with the administration's concern about the ethical aspect of hugely funded research projects have made the concept of informed consent imperative. To explain informed consent clearly, a definition given by the Board of Regents of the State of New York in 1966 is presented von Willisen 2001. It was made for medical professionals but is now applicable for other researchers including practicing anthropologists. The definition says no consent is valid unless it is made by a person with legal and mental capacity to make it and is based on a disclosure of all material facts. The federal government defines some populations as vulnerable and not able to give informed consent. These includes the underage, mentality handicapped, institutionalized or incarcerated persons under risk because of the illegal status of or activities, people who can't read, the people who are ill or physically handicapped, any fact which might influence the giving and withholding of consent are material. A patient has the right to know he is being asked to volunteer and to refuse to participate in an experiment for any reason, intelligent or otherwise, well informed or prejudiced. A physician has no right to withhold from a prospective volunteer any fact which he knows may influence the decision. It is the volunteer's decision to make, and the physician may not take it away from him by the manner in which he asks the question or explains or fails to explain the circumstances. Langer, 1966. The definition above may seem simple and easy to practice. However, it is not so. The job of the researchers to create the situation for informed consent would also include explaining to the prospective respondents about the consequences their information may create later. However, at the stage of explaining this to the respondents, the researcher is himself or herself not sure if these would be the real consequences which he or she predicts. In fact, in anthropological research, such are the cases where future implications of the research work cannot be forecasted. It is noticed in research in anthropological nature there is change in the way research is conducted. due to due to new or different or unexpected data found in the process of investigation. Thus, at the beginning, when consent was taken from the respondents for a particular kind of knowledge, the problem of new permissions from the same people with the rise of a new condition occurs. Consent allows for a particular kind of inquiry may not work for another kind. There are authors like Jorgensen, who says that consent should be requested for the research works for the research ends that are anticipated 1971. Jorgensen, who says that consent should be requested for the research ends that are anticipated 1971. But it is not necessary that this would make things easier. The only thing that may help the researcher in all this is to believe and remember that the aim of informed consent is to conduct research inquiry without tricky and distortion. The dispute of utility. Once the informants start giving up data about themselves and their community, they might do so leisurely and abundantly. They would do so if they are assured of confidentiality. However, the information gathered from the respondents may be used to dominate them. Once the research information gets into the hand of the sponsors, it cannot be predicted. They will always be put to use so as to benefit the communities studied. The knowledge may be used as a power to exploit them. Thus, practicing anthropologists should create terms or ways by which the respondents would not have to suffer the potential harm later. But it is difficult to bring this to reality. First, the fact needs to be accepted that most of the times it is the researcher who accumulates profits from the findings, while the same does not have any significance to the respondents. Many societies studies are not aware of what to do with the required data to the researchers of the researcher, or the topic of relevance to the researcher has no meaning to the community. In most cases, the researcher himself or herself does not provide the society with enough detail about their own work which they should do. It helps if the researcher, before beginning investigation, can take meticulously into regard the prosperity of the people studied in the research design stage itself. A solution may be a deal of the people studied in the research design. A solution may be a deal between the researcher and the community for the research matter and objectives of the research design. This may lead to some changes in the process of research and also parts which the society is not comfortable with may be removed in the design stage itself. The project can be restructured. The project can be restructured to be designed in such a way that the information provided by the respondents would be helpful to the respondent society. The way the final output would also come out should be accessible to the respondents community, or the researcher's entire project should be designed in such a way that everything should be created for the advantage or utilization of community studied. This way the moral obligation towards the community remain. In fields where research is done for application or practice. In fields where research is done for application or practice, this process of building utility is not difficult, as the main interest of the researcher should be a betterment of the community. However, one must be careful to note that the clients who hire anthropologists to work for a community might not be related to it and thus might not be completely aware of the intricacies of the community's life. In such a situation of the ethical scenario should be taken care of more carefully. The researchers should think about the efforts or consequences their work might have on the communities, as they would represent the clients, who usually are the government, social service institutions, development organizations, etc. All in all, the benefits of the community should always be at the back of the mind of researchers. The dispute of knowledge and its transmission. Transmission of knowledge means how findings are disseminated. That is usually through publication in the form of books, articles, or reports. This is one of the important ethical issues that is connected to the practicing anthropologists. Practicing anthropologists are always confronted with how to distribute the knowledge they gather. It is their duty to circulate their findings so that it may be added to the already available knowledge for better productivity. It is but obvious that research only comes to an end when its results are learned by all. Mostly practicing anthropologists need to publicize their work, not just to provide help to the communities they work with, but also so that their work gets known both in the academic and non academic worlds. In doing so, the anthropologists must be careful as what to reveal and what not to. Their publication may also help them work better and convincingly in the applied field. The published work will give ideas to the other prospective practicing anthropologists in their area of work. However, even when all this way sound easy, the issue of how much can be published and how much needs to be kept from the public is still a concern. One cannot ignore the fact that the practicing anthropologist's knowledge is more often than not owned by their clients. In all this, are believers. Researchers are believers of the ethical use of the distribution of data. The anonymity of the subject is maintained if need be during such distribution of knowledge, and is not to be compromised with any circumstances. Practicing anthropology, and we are going to discuss practice of ethics by practicing anthropologist. Let us now discuss how ethics is to be really practiced. Two vital aspects that practicing anthropologists need to look into are: first, accountability and responsibility; second, quality. Who said? Gardner and Lewis, 1996. It is really necessary that the practicing anthropologist knows whom to be accountable. It should never be the clients but the informants whose life he or she intrudes by extracting valuable information. Quality of work is equally vital, as during the time period of the anthropologist spends with the informants, it should be assured that the material collected should be of worth. Behavior is also an important factor. Overbearing and bossy attitude will not go down well with informants and might slow the process of rapport building in the beginning. It is imperative that the practitioner listens intently to the views shared by the respondents and show ample respect to the inhabitants, especially to the women, lower classes, lower caste, aged people, etc. When people offer their time to share their thoughts and knowledge, it is equally important that the researchers should return the favor by helping them in day-to-day work, or wherever possibility of helping them occurs. Promises made in return of information should always be kept. The complete sincerity of practicing anthropologists is depicted by the good deeds conducted and manners he or she exhibits. The respect should be mutual between the researcher and the researched. Hence, if ethical dictates are followed and recognized, then the suit after results would also follow. The position and status of the practicing anthropologist will also get acknowledged as a implementer, investigator, and promoter of applied practices, which enhances betterment and development of societies studied. Next heading is ethical responsibilities as cited by a professional anthropological body. In this section, we provide the learners with the statements on ethical practices for application as listed by the National Association for the Practice of Anthropology NAPA NAPA. The statements were written so as to act as guidelines for the practicing and applied anthropologist. Background: the preparation of the ethics statement involved a unique partnership between the National Association for the Practice of Anthropology NAPA NAPA and the Southern California Applied Anthropology Network SCAN SCAAN. Jean Gilbert, a SCAN member and chair of the NAPA Ethics Committee, worked with the local committee composed of several of her fellow SCAN members, Claudia Fishman, Neil Tashima, and Barbara Pillsbury, to create the first draft, which appeared in the December 1987 Anthropology newsletter. Membership comments were solicited at that time. The guidelines were also sent to all of the local practitioner organizations LPOs for comment, and in addition were the topic of discussion in a regular SCAN monthly meeting. The final version of the NAPA Ethical Guidelines for Practitioners was published in the November 1988 Anthropology newsletter. Gilbert thanked the membership of the SCAN and the following individuals who reviewed and commented on the draft: Fred Hess, Alvin Hatch, Barbara Frankel, and Jean Anderson. The final version incorporated many of their comments. NAPA Ethical Guidelines for Practitioners. These guidelines have been developed by the National Association for the Practice of Anthropology as a guide to the professional and ethical responsibilities that practicing anthropologists should uphold. A practicing anthropologist is a professionally trained anthropologist who is employed or retained to apply his or her specialized knowledge problem solving related to human welfare and human activities. The designation practicing anthropologist include full-time practitioners who work for clients such as the social service organizations, government agencies, and business and industrial firms. This term also includes part-time practitioners, usually academically based anthropologists, who accept occasional assignment with such clients. The substantive work of practicing anthropologists may include applied research, program design and implementation, client advocacy and advisory roles, and activities related to the communication of anthropological perspective. These guidelines are provided with the recognition that practicing anthropologists are involved in many types of policy-related research, frequently affected individuals and groups with diverse and sometimes conflicting interests. No code or set of guidelines can anticipate unique circumstances or direct practitioner actions in specific situations. The individual practitioner must be willing to make carefully considered ethical choices and be prepared to make clear and assumptions, facts, and issues on which those choices are based. The guidelines therefore address general context, priorities, and relationships which should be considered in ethical decision making in anthropological practice. First is, our primary responsibility is to respect and consider the welfare and human rights of all categories of people affected by decisions, programs, or research in which we take part. However, we recognize that many research and practice settings involve conflicts between benefits occurring to different parties affected by our research. It is our ethical responsibility, to the extent feasible, to bring to bear on decision making, our own or that of others, information concerning the actual or potential impacts of such activities on all whom they might affect. It is also our responsibility to assure, to to the extent possible, that the views of groups so affected are made clear and given full and serious consideration by decision makers and planners in order to preserve options and choices for affected groups. To our second, to our resource persons or research subjects, we owe full and timely disclosure of the objectives, methods and responsibilities of our activities. We should recognize the rights of the resource persons, whether individuals or groups, to receive recognition for their contributions or to remain anonymous if they so desire, or to decline participation altogether. These persons should be informed of our commitment to the principles of confidentiality throughout the design of the research or other activities involving resource persons, and should thoroughly investigate and understand all of the limitations on our claims of confidentiality and disclosure. Third is, to our employees or employers. To our employers, we owe competent, efficient, fully professional skills and techniques, timely performance of our work, and communication of our findings and recommendation in understandable, non-jargonistic language. As practicing anthropologists, we are frequently involved with employers or clients in legally contracted arrangements. It is our responsibility to carefully review contracts prior to signing and be willing to execute the terms and conditions stipulated in the contract once it has been signed. At the outset of a relationship or contract with an employer or client, we have an obligation to determine whether or not the work we are requested to perform is consistent with our commitment to deal fairly with the rights and welfare of persons affected by our work, recognizing that different constituencies may be affected in different ways. At this time, we should also discuss with our employer or client the intended use of data or materials to be generated by our work and clarify the extent to which information developed during our activities can be made available to the public. Issues surrounding the protection of the subject confidentiality and disclosure of information or findings should be thoroughly reviewed with the potential employer or client. We will not undertake activities which compromise our ethical responsibilities. We will carry out our work in such a manner that the employer fully understands our ethical priorities, commitments, and responsibilities. When any time during the course of work performance, the demands of the employer require us to violate the ethical standards of our profession, we have the responsibility to clarify the nature of the conflict between the request and our standards, and to propose alternatives that are consistent with our standards. If such a conflict cannot be resolved, we should terminate the relationship. Fourth, in our relations with students and trainees, we will be candid, fair, non exploitative, non discriminatory, and committed to the students' or trainees' welfare. We recognize that such mentoring does involve an exchange in which practitioners share their knowledge and experience in return for the significant efforts and contribution of the students or trainees. We should be honest and thorough in our presentation of material and should strive to improve our teachings and training techniques and our methods of evaluating the effectiveness of our instruction. As practicing anthropologists, we are frequently called upon to instruct, train, or teach individuals, anthropologists, and other in non-academic settings, workshop participants in service trainees, continuation or certification program trainees, and research teams. To such persons, we owe training that is informed, timely, and relevant to their needs. Our instruction should inform both students and trainees of the ethical responsibilities involved in the collection and use of data. To our students and trainees, we owe respect for and openness to non anthropological methods and perspective. Student and trainee contributions to our work, including publications, should be accurately and completely attributed. Fifth, to our colleagues, anthropologists, and others, we have a responsibility to conduct our work in a manner that facilitates their activities or that does not unjustly compromise their ability to carry out professional work. The cross disciplinary nature of the work of practicing anthropologists require us to be informed and respectful of the disciplinary and professional perspectives, methodologies, and ethical requirements of non anthropological colleagues with whom we work. We will accurately report we will accurately report the contribution of our colleagues to our research, practice related activities, and publications. Sixth and the last, to the discipline of anthropology, we have a responsibility to act in a manner that presents the discipline to the public and to other professional colleagues in a favorable light. We will point out the value of anthropological contribution to the understanding of human problems and humankind. Where appropriate in the context of our work, we will encourage the use of anthropological approaches and recommend the participation of other anthropologists. We will contribute to the growth of our discipline through communicating and publishing scientific and practicing information or practical information about the work in which we are engaged, including as appropriate theory processes, outcomes, and professional techniques and methods. At the last, we will discuss summary. To sum up, this unit discusses a major concern in the practice of anthropological knowledge, that is ethics. In today's world, ethics and ethical concerns cannot be avoided, and the very fact that anthropology deals with human beings, its need is most vital. The unit begins with the description of what ethics is and what is involved. It then gives a detailed description of the history of anthropology, where the use or misuse of ethics in studying communities led to the creation of various anthropological bodies coming up with guidelines for ethical practice. The unit progresses with the various kinds of pertinent debates that is involved in the practice of ethics, the major ones being the issues of confidentiality, consent, utility, and dissemination of knowledge. The unit further looks into some more ethical concerns that a practicing anthropology can deploy while conducting research, and lastly, the unit provides the guidelines stated by NAPA for the learners to have a better knowledge of ethical scenario and its need in anthropological research. References you can see: Beals RL 1969, Politics of Social Research, An Inquiry into the Ethics and Responsibilities of Social Scientists, Chicago, Aldini. Second is Belshaw, CS 1976, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, An Anthropology of Public Policy, New York, Pergamon Press. Third is Fluher Laban 1991, Ethics and the Profession of Anthropology, Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania Press. University of Pennsylvania Press. Fourth is Patricia A. Marshall, 1992, Research Ethics in Applied Anthropology, Ethics and Human Research, 1992. Weaver T., 1973, To See Ourselves, Anthropology and Modern Social Issues, New York, Scott Formans. Von Willisen, John, 2002, Applied Anthropology, An Introduction, 3rd edition, New York, Bergin and Garvey. Suggested reading: Fluher Laban, 1991, Ethics and the Profession of Anthropology, Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania Press. Second, Jacobs, Schuellen and Castle John, 1987, Handbook on Ethical Issues in Anthropology, New York, American Anthropological Association. Sample questions. First, define ethics. What is ethics? Why it is important to be ethical in our practice? Second question, the issues of ethics begins with the investigator. Discuss about it. Third question, give a critical account of the ethical concerns in the history of anthropology. Fourth and last question, discuss the importance of confidentiality and anonymity in anthropological research. Thank you very much.